Welcome to plzsoccer.com. I'm Peter Martin. I'm delighted to say Ged Fitzsimmons is with me here in the studio. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, who is Ged Fitzsimmons? Well, Ged Fitzsimmons is a man who is on a labour of love for the gentleman that we have on our back screen here, because you are on a crusade, a labour of love, and you've got the end goal, which is to try and make a documentary about the wonderful George Connelly. Tell me all about it.
Yeah, it is a labour of love, absolutely. We started filming this in 2019. I think at the time, the whole thing about George Connelly is that there's always been a mythology about George. There's always been about this thing about people don't quite know what he looks like, but they've always heard this myth about special moments in his career, incredible things that happened. So when I was a young filmmaker breaking into the industry, I remember my dad saying to me, you need to find out what happened to George Connelly if you break into the industry. If you ever make a film about George. So I found him in 2019, and he'd made a few little media appearances here and there. My interest in George was always about why was it that when Celtic fans, especially of my dad's vintage, spoke about the past, spoke about that golden era in the 60s and 70s, they would speak about Jimmy Johnson, you know, as if he was some angel, some alien force that had came to Celtic, and he was... And then, of course, as a kid, you would see the footage and go, look at this comical wee guy, he was fascinating. So you got the attraction, you got why there was an obsession about him. And then, so they would be really romantic and wax lyrical about Kenny Dalglish and, you know, Bobby Murdoch, all those incredible, legendary, iconic players. And they were the same about George. But there was always a tone shift, there was always a strange tone that would descend onto the conversation, a melancholy that would descend onto the conversation about George, as though he was this kind of what could have been kind of character. What is it? Why are they so? What is the enigma in all of this? You know. So when I found him in 2019, he'd made a few media appearances. He'd released a book, and we spoke at great length. Me and George's son David, we were roughly the same age. We went to Celtic Park at the same time in the mid-90s when Tommy Burns took us back to Celtic Park. And so we just blathered away. It was actually Paul John Dykes that made the introduction. He's free up that neck of the woods. And I really didn't think that George would be into it. About 5 years before that, I had made an approach, and the word that came back from Davy Hay was that he didn't want to resurrect it all. Which I thought was amazing biblical language to use about himself. I don't want to resurrect it all. Wow. So what does that mean? So when I met him in 2019, he was sober for 5 years, which is a miracle if you know George's story about how dark things got for him. And in the first few conversations, I told him that we want to do three things with the story. One, we want to celebrate George Connelly's career. This is a guy who won 7 league titles, 5 Scottish Cups, 3 League Cups, a Player of the Year award, qualified Scotland for a World Cup, destroyed Don Revie's Leeds United in 1970, and played in a European Cup final. So the slightly cliched kind of quote that I've got about this is that 99% of footballers won't achieve 1% of what George Connelly achieved. And he only had about half a career, 7 years, 8 years maybe.
I think for people of certain generations, and obviously your dad's conveying a story about him, whether it's mythical in your eyes or not, there are people who witnessed the real talent of him. If I could try and bridge that gap when I was thinking about you coming in today, Ged, I was trying to think about fans of today who would think, well, what is he all about? You know, he's like a Beckenbauer, a Hansen and a Virgil van Dijk.
Totally.
It's the only way to sum up all the qualities that he had.
Absolutely. Jim Craig's in the film, and he reads a piece from an old sort of Celtic manual, I think it is. I don't know what actually the book is, but anyway, he reads this passage, and he says somebody's going to have to find a position this kid can't play. In the 1969 Scottish Cup final, Jimmy Johnson is banned for playing. I think he got sent off in the previous round. And so George, as this 6'3", 6'4", whatever he is, lanky, kind of young professional, gets played outside right in Jimmy Johnson's position. He plays number 7. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why he ends up in the position he does when he scores that iconic goal.
Yeah. So
George could play anywhere. And I think that's the thing about trying to quantify George is also, it's quite hard to tie him down, but because you're right, you're talking about various positions. I think the way I look at him looking back is he was a lot more contemporary than the football of the time. He was playing a really modern role in that ball playing, the central defensive midfielder or even sweeper sometimes. He was the guy that could strut out from the back like Virgil van Dijk, but he's also the guy that could land a ball on somebody's foot in the box like Pirlo could.
Yeah, the reason why I think the documentary will have such great appeal, and for you as a filmmaker, it has everything in it. It has the success, it has the romance of it all, and then it has the tragedy. And the ultimate thing from that period of time is men couldn't convey the problems, the psychological problems, the demons that were lurking in the back of their mind. And that, for me, is what's probably going to be the most intriguing part of the tale that you're going to try and tell.
Definitely. George he's never really made any secret of the fact that he's had huge demons and huge difficulty in the past. And this is a story about men's mental health. But it's a story about men's mental health in the 1970s when the people of the time never had the vocabulary or the experience to handle it in the best possible way. We still don't, right? And so while people might perceive a failure there, I think that what you'll see is that George had possibly the greatest male role models available at the time. He was Billy McNeil's roomer. He roomed with Billy McNeil.
Yeah. And
he was a brother figure, or Davy Hay was a brother figure to him. And of course he's got the father figure of Jock Stein. So he did have strong enough role models run about him. But the problem is when you take a kid from the sticks and you bring him into the big smoke and you put him into a changing room where, I mean, can you imagine the characters in that room, right? If you're a kind of quiet, retiring, shy guy like George, and you're in a dressing room with Bertie Auld or any one of the Jimmy Johnson, any one of the Lisbon Lions, they're incredible lightning fast humour and wit. That could be quite, that could take you aback a wee bit.
Yeah.
So he had a lot of maturity to do pretty quickly. And see if George says this a lot, all I knew was football. It's the only thing I knew. And there's a sadness in that, it's a shame, because when the rug gets pulled out from you when you're 25, 26, and that you remove all of that for your life, what are you? Even to this day, George will say, when you're having conversations with him about deep, meaningful things, about his views and his feelings and personal things that are the real colour in the film, he's got a very, very nimble way of going back to football.
Yes.
He takes that route straight back. So yeah, it's the personal part of George's story is absolutely the thing that we are keen to tell, because it's a very good example of a guy in his 70s being very candid and open about his mental health.
I don't want to miss the main objective of this, and I think it's the key element of it. I could talk to you forever about George Connelly. There are so many great stories that people can regale about him, but I want to get to the objective of it, which is basically you trying to get it made. Mm-hmm. And that really is an appeal.
Yes. So what you can never do when you go to the public to say, can you help us finish this film, is say that if we fail, there won't be a film, right? For 7 years, I have been working with all the main characters, George, his wife, his family, the players his teammates, the people who were witnessed at the time. Archie McPherson's in there. So we have a film. This is the key thing. It's there. This is about elevating this into something that's a cinematic experience. And so there's some things that we remain to complete. We want to shoot reconstruction scenes. In areas of George's story, there is an absence of archive, Well, what happened from 1975 to 1999, 2000 to present day? How do we tell the story in there? So in the film, George visits a physical place to encounter or to go back and encounter his past, to challenge his past. And it's the old Celtic Park. It's the old oval ground. And it's so old and forgotten that trees have started to grow up through the stands. Now, it's a physical place. It's Cathkin Park.
Yeah.
Right? So you might see in the trailer, George, in the interview, he actually says to me, Jed, I'd need to go back there to remember it. And I say, well, why don't you? And so he goes through the little stars in their eyes door that we've created,
Yeah.
and he re-emerges at the old Celtic Park. And there he encounters the three ghosts of George Connelly, the kid who left the sticks to the big smoke, the icon footballer, and the man in crisis who walked away from it all.
What do you need from Celtic fans, neutral fans, lovers of football? What do they need to do right now to help you?
So we launched a crowdfunder last Tuesday. So just over a week later, the first target is £50,000. After just over a week, we're already at 31, and I am absolutely blown away by the way that the fans have responded to this. George said to me, "Do you think MD will care about me this, Jed?" And you go, "God, George, if only you knew." So this was a wee bit daunting for me, because what if I'm wrong? What if nobody responds to this? And what I do know is that on a daily basis, Helen, George's wife, has been reading the comments on that crowdfunder back to George, and it's galvanising him. You know, it's flooding the colour back to his cheeks, and he's buzzing, and it's great. So we have a goal of 50 grand, and we are running this until August. And what we're saying is this: the Celtic fans have got an ability to do something extraordinary here. George was at Celtic for roughly about 10, 11 years. There was literal plans for him. I mean, 1975, Billy McNeil left, and the plan was for George to be the captain. There was even the suggestion that he could have at some point become a manager, but who knows what that was going to be. But the reality is he was due a testimonial, and because of the misfortunes that happened in George's life, he was deprived of that. You know, nobody's fault, by the way, but he was deprived of that recognition. So we're going to give him that. We're going to give him the testimonial, but it just won't happen in a stadium, on a football park. It will happen in a cinema. And so in recent years, I mean, there's no secret at the moment. There's a lot of disharmony at Celtic. There's a lot of disconnect. And one amazing thing that has happened in this campaign is that the Celtic fan media, who have all got their own audiences and their own objectives, have all come together. I'm in a group chat with almost every one of them, and they've all come together, put their differences aside, and they're all coming together for George, and the fans are doing the same thing. So this is a film for the fans, by the fans. It's going to re-establish George's colours as a true Celtic legend. Nobody has that kind of CV and it's seen as a failure, right? It's just because it cut short. Who knows what it would have ended up being. So we're going to celebrate George's career. We're going to have a proper emotional feature film about the realities of mental illness in men. And we're also going to give a platform to the invisible victims of men in crisis, who are the immediate families. And I think millions of families all over the country will be able to relate to this. Even if they're not into football, they will see that they've experienced similar things that the Connollys have.
How do they commit?
Sorry?
How do they commit? What can they do?
The fans?
Yes.
So you quite easily can go onto our crowdfunder. If you search George Connelly crowdfunder on Google, it will be the first result.
We'll put a link on the video as well.
Perfect.
For you.
That would be amazing. And there are a whole bunch of perks. There's a whole bunch of things that you can donate to get. The one that's probably the most popular is George has signed 100 replica shirts for the 73-74 season. Now, they're not the exact shirts from back in the day, because we would have a difficulty finding those exact shirts.
Don't I know it?
Right, exactly. Right. But we have replicas with a nice big fat collar and the 70s collar, and there's 100 of them going, and it's £500 donation for each of them, and they've been very popular. And all the way up to, the key thing I want to express here is that we're not really fussed about the exact amount that's donated. It's the fact that there's this huge groundswell of support for George. You can put anything in it, for a £5 to 10 grand, depends how deep your pockets are. But this is genuinely a film by the fans, for the fans, and by the end of this, if there was one thing that would unite the fans right now, I think it's absolutely poetic and romantic and beautiful that it's George Connelly, the guy who's disappeared all the years, and he returns, and and he's the guy that brings the fans together.
we love a happy ending.
Yes.
Did you get without giving away too much about it, did you get a real sense? You mentioned he's been, not drinking for 5 years. You've mentioned that, that he still has the insecurities, but did you get a sense from the journey and your discussions with him that this is a George who's finally at peace and embraced what he didn't want to embrace earlier?
So I'm going to say yes to that, right? But the reality with any mental illness story and any alcoholism story is that it's complex. You never stop being an alcoholic, right? So when I first met him in 2019, he had been sober for 5 years. And at that point we thought, amazing, this is great. Like I said, we approached before that, and I think he was still drinking when we released the book, and he wasn't quite happy with some of the stuff that was in the book, and it made his life more difficult. And I would never switch a camera on in front of somebody that's drunk. I just wouldn't do it. And so that would be exploitative, and we just left it. So when I seen that he was sober in 2019, amazing. His family were really delighted. But what you then get is, what we actually were left with was that it was too perfect a straight line, right? And of course COVID comes, and it makes George's life a wee bit more difficult than we anticipated. And the reality here is that we've now got a film that's accurate, that's realistic. It doesn't just say you're cured of alcoholism. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So George takes one day at a time. He may well have an occasional blip here and there, but the reality of it is that whatever happened to George Connelly, he finally became happy. That's exactly what it is. And I think when we've pitched this film in the past, people say, God, this is going to be fun and games, isn't it? Because of the difficulty that's in there. Of course there's difficulty in there. There's light and shade. But there is, George will say, as he said, I don't want to give too much away about the film, but George says, that he's achieved all those things in football, stuff that nobody will ever achieve, a lot of players won't ever achieve. Despite all those things, despite that unbelievable CV, he says that his greatest achievement in life is his victory over mental illness and addiction. And I think that's where the hope is. You don't need to make people happy with the film, you just need to give them hope. And I think this is hopefully that's what the film's going to do for people like George and families like the Connollys.
Yeah, and just before we finish now, and I wish you well in this venture, Ged, it will be, I'm almost certain, inspirational. And I think will tell a tale that will help a number of people. But the other thing about it is you've been on a trail that will take people back in time. There will be some wonderful footage that I think people will love to see, especially with George strutting his stuff.
100%. The key, I think one of the main reasons that we are doing the crowdfunder is that archive can be extremely expensive, as you well know, right? But we also have unearthed, in the search for George, we also unearthed a treasure trove of archive from the 60s and 70s of access all areas, at the ground, in away grounds, on supporters' buses. It is a treasure trove, and it's a time machine that will take us back with George to that time. I mean, George appears in there in his kipper tie and all the rest of it. So it will be something that the fans have probably never seen before. In fact, I almost guarantee they'll have never seen it before. And the whole part of the process of making this film is also restoring this, treasure trove of Celtic history.
Yeah, who came up with the title?
Well, strangely enough, there's a story behind the title, and yeah, I will tell you this story. George, all the way through the film, references why did he leave. I was getting far from the Madden crowd, Ged. I was getting far from the Madden crowd. I was out of my marriage. I was out of the football. I was out of everything. I was away. And what people don't know is that George, when I met him anyway, and he's got a thing at the moment called peripheral neuropathy. He's going numb from the feet up, which is quite ironic given what made him famous was his feet.
Yeah.
He likens it to Eric Clapton losing the feeling in his fingers, right?
Yeah.
So George cycles a lot. He cycles like 20 miles a week. He would cycle from Clackmannanshire to Dunfermline and back, right? So there's bits of that in the trailer. And to him, that's him getting far from the Madden crowd, getting away from all the noise, getting away. And it's a real meditative thing for George, exercise and getting out into the countryside. It's brilliant. So that's but he says it over and over and over and over again in the film. And so my DOP a brilliant director, Stephen Bennett, he said, what does he, why does he keep mentioning this phrase, fart? What is that? So I asked him, and he said, he explains it in those terms, but he also said, it's a Julie Christie film.
Yes.
Right? Well, it turns out, at the very, very, this isn't too much of a spoiler, it's just the title, but at the very, very last 10 minutes of a long day of interviews, like 7 hours of interviewing, we got to talking about it, and he said, I said, what is the film? And he explains what the film is, and then he said just before we wrapped, and it was just luck, he says, on the night before my debut in Newcastle, Jock noticed that I was looking pretty nervous, and the boys were all making a noise, and they were obviously in the bus in Newcastle, and they'd probably wait for a pint and all that stuff, right? So he said to Tommy Gemmell and Willie Wallace, he says, listen, go and take the boy to the pictures, take him out the way for all the carry on here. And they go and see Far From the Madding Crowd. So that wee bit made me think, oh no, there's too much, this is all too perfect. So while the campaign at the moment is whatever happened to George Connelly, because that's what we want a response to, we want people to respond to, oh yeah, well, of course, what happened to George? I think that's far too perfect a title to ignore, so that's what we've went for.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it, Ged. I wish you every success. I mean, I know that Celtic fans will get right behind you. I think you'll achieve much more than the target you've set. You might even be able to add a few more bits of footage in it, but it's going to be a great watch because he was a wonderful player, and you've rhymed off all the medals that he won and the experiences that he had, but some people, including your dad, would have looked and thought he could have achieved so much more. But listen, I can't wait to hear it, see it, and then hopefully at the end of it you'll get the accolade you deserve. Thank you, Ged, for coming in. There'll be a link just at the bottom of this interview. Click on it, contribute, help Ged and all the team that have put this documentary together to get to their goal, and certainly it'll be great to go through all that nostalgic footage and listen to the great man himself talk about his life and what happened to George Connelly. Thanks to Ged, and thanks to you for listening, and thanks to you for watching.